Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel captures Rafah border crossing, cutting off aid. The Israeli military announced on Tuesday that its ground forces captured the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing, cutting off a vital aid route as Palestinians are facing starvation. So Israeli tanks and troops entered Rafah late Monday, and Israeli strikes pounded the city throughout the night, hitting residential homes. Hospital records show that at least 23 Palestinians were killed in that bombardment, including 6 women and 5 children. The Israeli military claimed that it killed about 20 Hamas fighters in exchanges of gunfire. And then I know Tuesday night into Wednesday morning now, Israel is striking Rafah again, and there's more casualties. And the Israeli military has also claimed that the Rafah crossing had been used for terrorist operations, but did not provide evidence for that claim. So the Rafah border crossing, and this is the crossing from Egypt, it's been the main hub for aid deliveries into Gaza and was the only crossing not controlled by Israel. And now it's closed off, and it's not clear when or if Israel plans on reopening it. The UN's World Food Program said that the nearby Kerem Shalom crossing still remains closed. So that's the other crossing in the south that goes into Israel. But a lot more has been coming through Rafah. I mean, so this is, as the people are on the brink of famine, the World Food Program, Cindy McCain has said that there's already a full-blown famine occurring in northern Gaza. I know there is another border crossing open in the north. I'm not sure how much is coming through there. But from what I understood, it wasn't nearly as much as what was coming through Rafah. And James Elder, who's the head of the UN's Children's Relief Agency, UNICEF, said on Tuesday that if the Rafah crossing is closed for an extended period of time, it would be hard to see how famine in Gaza can be averted. So also on Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected a ceasefire proposal that was accepted by Hamas. He accused Hamas of trying to sabotage the entry of Israeli forces into Rafah by announcing that it accepted the ceasefire deal. Netanyahu said that did not happen and that this deal was very far from Israel's demands. It looks like some negotiations are still happening. We'll get into that in another story. So they did it. They captured the border crossing. And this next story here, Biden gave Netanyahu the green light to capture the Rafah crossing. So Axios reported on Tuesday that President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu discussed Israel's plans to capture the Rafah border crossing in southern Gaza before the Israeli military launched the operation. The report said that the operation did not cross Biden's red line, although it's not clear if there really is red lines for Israel here. Biden continues to give them all this support. U.S. officials have said that they're opposed to a major operation in Rafah. They've kind of changed the rhetoric recently, saying, and basically what they're saying is that, this is like a limited incursion to capture the border crossing. It doesn't seem to be, a major attack on the city, even though it looks like there has been pretty major airstrikes. And I just mentioned that capturing the border crossing and cutting off the aid, I mean, that could be just as devastating to the civilians in Gaza as, an invasion of Rafah. And right now it's unclear when those aid deliveries will resume. So a senior Israeli official told Axios that during the call with Netanyahu, Biden did not pull the handbrake on the capture of the Rafah crossing. So basically saying Biden didn't say, don't do it. And 2 U.S. officials said that Biden did not view the current Israeli operations as a breaking point in relations. And then John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, he basically said during a press briefing that the U.S. approved this operation, that they didn't have a problem with it. Kirby said, quote, "We've been very consistent about our concerns of a major ground operation in Gaza that would put at great risk the refugees that are still there, and nothing's changed about that. The Israelis have told us that that's not what this is," end quote. So the Israelis told them, don't worry about it, so they're not worrying about it. He said that Israel assured the U.S. that the operation was, quote, "of limited scope, scale, and duration, and aimed at cutting off Hamas's ability to ship arms across the Rafah border," end quote. But what about the aid shipments? They haven't had any, and Israel has been inspecting all the trucks entering Rafah anyway. They first stop, I think, at the Kerem Shalom crossing, and they get inspected, and then they go over to Rafah. So, we see the U.S. saying that they've been so concerned about the aid getting into Gaza, but I didn't see any sort of concern about the aid deliveries being cut off through Rafah. Israeli tanks and soldiers took the border. That was just kind of a summary of what happened. But so, we've kind of seen this narrative that Netanyahu defied Biden by ordering this operation, but it turns out he ran the plan by him before he actually launched it. All right, the next one here, a private U.S. security firm may take control of the Rafah border crossing. So Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, reported on Tuesday that the U.S., Israel, and Egypt have agreed that control of the Rafah border crossing that connects Egypt and Gaza will be handed over to a private American security firm. The report came after Israel captured the border crossing in an operation that was approved by the Biden administration. The private American firm was not named, but Haaretz said that it employs veterans of elite U.S. Army units and has been employed in several Middle Eastern and African countries to guard sensitive sites. State Department spokesman Matt Miller, he was asked about this report and said that he was not aware of any plans for Israel to transfer control of the border crossing. So under this reported arrangement, American mercenaries would take responsibility for overseeing the border crossing, which would include monitoring goods coming into Gaza and preventing Hamas from taking control. Vital deliveries have been cut off since Israel took the crossing early Tuesday. So this, again, this is Haaretz. This isn't, this seems like this might be a plan, to put American mercenaries, a private security firm, in charge of the Rafah border crossing. How are the Palestinians going to view that? Are they going to view it as a private security firm, or are they going to view it as Americans on the ground in Gaza? So the Haaretz report said that the arrangement was part of an effort by Israel to win agreement from the U.S. and Egypt for a Rafah operation. So it's saying that Israel got the U.S. and Egypt to agree to this, to Israel capturing the Rafah border crossing. And this is something Egypt has been warning Israel against over the past few months, not to do, but it looks like they have convinced them. Egypt's big concern would be that if Israel launched a big invasion of Rafah, it would send civilians into Egypt. But I guess they convinced them, you put this American company in charge of the security. So if we do go for the city, then they're not going to let the people in. Who knows what would really happen if there was a big invasion and the over 1 million civilians tried to flee the city. This report, Haaretz report, said that Israel had given assurances that it would limit its attack on Rafah to securing the border crossing, although Israeli bombs have been pounding the city and still are. All right, so the next one here, this is a really horrific account from a woman in Rafah. This is an article from BBC titled, "My Children Cling to Me as Dogs Raid Rafah Graves Near Our Shelter." So this is a woman, Rahab Abu Daka. She has 7 children, and she's living in a tent in Rafah as a refugee. And she's saying that there's all these wild dogs around now that are eating dead bodies and that are digging up graves and eating people, and her children are seeing this, which, it's just a situation you try to imagine yourself in, and it's really hard to fathom. And she's saying, in one anecdote, I'll just read a few quotes from her. She said, quote, "This morning the dogs took out a body from one of the graves and were eating it. From night until dawn, the dogs do not let us sleep. Our children keep holding on to me because of how scared they are," end quote. The dogs come in packs of dozens, domestic pets whose owners are dead or displaced, mixed with Rafah's existing population of strays, all of them now feral and scavenging for whatever they can eat. The cemetery has numerous shallow graves where people place their dead until a time comes when they can be taken to their home area. On some graves, relatives have placed bricks to try to keep the dogs away from the dead. Rahab Abu Daka is gaunt and exhausted. Her mouth and nose are covered by cloth to fend off the stench of the graves. She praises the young men who came earlier to enter a body dragged out in the morning. So they buried a body that was dragged out by the dogs in the morning. She said, quote, "I don't accept that me or my children should live next to a cemetery. My child is in the 3rd grade, and today, instead of playing a game, he was drawing a grave, and in the middle he drew a dead body. These are the children of Palestine. What can I tell you? Miserable, the word miserable doesn't even explain it," end quote. So just really horrific situation to imagine. And that was a few days ago. That was 3 days ago. So the situation's just getting worse for them. All right, so the next one here, Biden reaffirms ironclad support for Israel. So on Tuesday, President Biden delivered a speech at the Holocaust Memorial Museum's Days of Remembrance ceremony, and he declared his support for Israel remains ironclad, and just showing that he will continue to support this slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. Biden said, quote, "My commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree," end quote. So basically saying, even if we have issues, we're still going to continue to support Israel no matter what. He also slammed the pro-Palestinian protests at colleges across the country, again smearing them as anti-Semitic, despite the fact that many Jewish students are participating. Biden said, quote, "On college campuses, Jewish students blocked, harassed, attacked while walking to class. Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic posters, slogans calling for the annihilation of Israel, the world's only Jewish state," end quote. And he again portrayed the protests as violent, even though the movement has been peaceful. The most significant violence has occurred when the cops have gone to break up these protests, or in that one case at UCLA when the pro-Israel crowd attacked the encampment. Biden said, quote, "There is no place on any campus in America, any place in America for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind, whether against Jews or anyone else. Violent attacks, destroying property is not peaceful protest. It's against the law, and we are not a lawless country. We're a civil society. We uphold the rule of law," end quote. So again, very strongly coming out against these protests. And this is a speech that he gave on the Holocaust. And he made no mention of the tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians who have been slaughtered by Israel in the U.S.-backed campaign in Gaza. And I put a quote in at the end here from Amos Goldberg, who's a Holocaust scholar at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So a Holocaust scholar in Israel who recently said that Israel was undoubtedly committing genocide. Goldberg wrote in the Palestine Project, this was an op-ed published last month, quote, "Yes, it is genocide. It is so difficult and painful to admit it. But despite all that, and despite all our efforts to think otherwise, after 6 months of brutal war, we can no longer avoid this conclusion. Jewish history will henceforth be stained with the mark of Cain for the most horrible of crimes, which cannot be erased from its forehead. As such, this is the way it will be viewed in history's judgment for generations to come," end quote. So pretty powerful words there from a Holocaust scholar. And again, you have Biden delivering this speech while he is actively supporting this genocidal slaughter in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Hamas says no ceasefire deal if Israel continues Rafah operation. So Osama Hamdan, a Hamas political official, said on Tuesday that there will be no ceasefire and hostage deal if Israel continues its military operations in Rafah. He said this at a press conference in Beirut, which I believe is where he's based. He said, quote, "The occupation army's storming of the Rafah crossing and its barbaric and criminal bombing at the insistence of Netanyahu and his extremist warlords as an open attempt to sabotage all the efforts of the mediators to achieve an agreement to stop the aggression. If this aggression continues, Netanyahu will only suffer more defeats and disgrace, end quote. So he also mentioned that the Israeli capture of the Rafah border crossing, and said that the crossing, quote, was and will remain a purely Egyptian-Palestinian crossing, end quote. So just the recap on the situation with the ceasefire. So you had Hamas say that they accepted a ceasefire proposal from Qatari and Egyptian mediators. Then Israel said this was not terms that we agreed to, and they went ahead with the attack on Rafah. And Netanyahu said on Tuesday that the proposal was very far from Israel's demands. And according to media reports, Al Jazeera published the whole text of the deal that they agreed to. It would lead to a permanent ceasefire and withdrawal of Israeli forces in like the second phase. So this is an idea Netanyahu, of course, has rejected, for months now. But Netanyahu still sent a delegation to Egypt for negotiations, and Egyptian media is reporting that all parties, Israel, Hamas, and then the mediators are attending. They've returned to the negotiating table. It's tough to be optimistic about the chances of a deal. But what's interesting is that CIA Director William Burns, he had been involved in discussions with Qatar and Egypt before Hamas said that it accepted this ceasefire proposal, which means the U.S. was probably aware of what the proposal was. According to Axios, Israeli officials were unhappy with the Biden administration because they thought the U.S. was aware of the proposal and did not give Israel a heads up. So we'll see. I mean, again, negotiations have resumed. I just can't imagine Israel agreeing to any kind of permanent ceasefire thing, but maybe some vague commitment to work. The wording, I know in one of the recent proposals was, agreeing to work toward a sustainable calm, which is vague, but, maybe some kind of commitment like that could be made. I don't know. But at this moment, Netanyahu has Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and his party who are threatening to quit the government if he goes ahead with the invasion in Rafah, which could mean elections. So Netanyahu has every motive to keep this thing going and to really ramp things up in Rafah. And I know Israel's threatening that if there's no ceasefire deal, they will expand operations in Rafah. All right, so the next one here, U.S. report on Israel's wartime conduct in Gaza is delayed. So this article is from Politico. It says the Biden administration's report on whether Israel has violated U.S. and international humanitarian law during the war in Gaza has been delayed and will no longer be released on Wednesday as planned. 3 Senate aides and a House aide told Politico. The State Department has been working for months on the report, which will issue a determination on whether Israel has violated international humanitarian law since the war in Gaza began. If so, the U.S. would be expected to stop sending Israel military assistance. There was just a Lockheed Martin ad in this Politico story. It's pretty amazing that they just have an ad for Lockheed Martin on their site, man. It's different now, though. But anyway, the report won't be finished by an initial Wednesday deadline, said the aides, granted anonymity to discuss internal communications. In an email, the Biden administration notified the Hill that it will miss the date without providing a clear reason why. So again, there was this national security memorandum that the U.S. had to get assurances from countries that they provide military aid, that they wouldn't use the weapons to violate U.S. or international law, and also that they wouldn't block U.S. humanitarian aid shipments. Israel is clearly doing both of those things, but it gave assurances anyway, and the State Department said that they were good. And now they have to submit this report to Congress saying, a full report basically saying why they believe that they're not violating international law, and it's been delayed. So a senior administration official told Politico that they expect it will be delayed less than a week. But we'll see. I mean, I know it was something like 80-something House Democrats now are calling on Biden are telling Biden that there is evidence Israel's violating the law. So they might come under some pressure. The unfortunate part is that the majority of Congress is still in favor of continuing to arm Israel. So even if they get, if they just lie in this report, unfortunately, I don't think there's enough people in Congress that can make them do anything about it. All right, so the next one here, Belarus tests the readiness of its nuclear forces. So Belarus announced on Tuesday that its military was conducting a drill on the readiness of its forces to use tactical nuclear weapons, which Russia recently deployed to the country. The announcement came a day after Moscow said that it would launch drills simulating the use of tactical nuclear weapons in response to provocations from the West, including comments from French President Emmanuel Macron about the possibility of sending ground troops to Ukraine. Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Krenin said that President Lukashenko ordered a, quote, snap readiness test of forces and capabilities of delivery vehicles for non-strategic nuclear weapons, end quote. Alexander Volfovich, the state secretary of the Security Council of Belarus, said the drills were being conducted, quote, against the backdrop of the actions of Russian colleagues on the use of non-strategic nuclear warheads and is fully coordinated with them, end quote. So these drills will involve an Iskander missile system battalion and a squadron of Su-25 airplanes. According to TASS, the Russian news agency, Moscow has given Belarus the nuclear-capable Iskander missile system and has assisted in retrofitting Belarusian aircraft to enable them to carry nuclear munitions. So Russian President Vladimir Putin first announced back in March 2023, so a little over a year ago now, that was when he announced Russia would deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus. To justify that decision, he pointed to NATO's nuclear sharing program, under which the U.S. has nuclear weapons deployed in Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Turkey, and Italy. So again, this is just concerning stuff to see. Russia announced those nuclear drills in response to Western provocations and Western rhetoric. That's what they're saying. It's not a secret. They're saying why they're doing it. And then Belarus, Russia's neighbor that now has Russian nuclear weapons, is doing the drills as well. You have Poland talking about, hey, maybe we can get some nukes. I know even Finland, politicians in Finland aren't ruling out the idea of hosting U.S. nuclear weapons. I mean, just the tensions just continue to rise. And I kept up the story from yesterday about Russia warning the UK that if British weapons are used to hit Russian territory, that they will hit British military targets. I mean, things are at a really bad place here when it comes to the proxy war in Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, 2 Israeli soldiers killed in a Hezbollah drone attack. This one is from Jason Ditz. So on Monday afternoon, a Hezbollah attack using explosive-laden drones detonated in the northern Israeli town of Metula, killing 2 Israeli soldiers and slightly wounding another. Those killed were identified as reservists. Israeli officials said that the 2 had attempted to intercept the drone but failed, and it detonated amid a group of soldiers. So apparently 2 drones were used in the attack, and one of them was intercepted. And so this is seen as a retaliation for an Israeli attack against a warehouse in eastern Lebanon near Baalbek. The attack wounded 3 Lebanese civilians and destroyed the building. And in response, Israel hit back by striking 15 targets at a Hezbollah military camp. So this situation continues to be very volatile on the Israeli-Lebanon border. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. and the Philippines simulate conflicts over Taiwan and the South China Sea. So this article is from the South China Morning Post, and so these Balikatan exercises continue. These are the U.S.-Philippine drills that they're conducting in the South China Sea, and very provocative toward China, of course. I almost said Russia, but we're talking about China now. Philippine and U.S. forces are simulating scenarios that observers say are relevant to potential conflicts over Taiwan and the South China Sea, with missions involving the retaking of an island and the sinking of a Chinese-made vessel in the final week of this year's Balikatan joint military exercises. On Monday, a small contingent of U.S. and Philippine Marines disembarked from Black Hawk helicopters in Itbayat, a remote town located on the Philippines' northernmost island of the same name, which is about 100 miles south of Taiwan. Their mission was to practice retaking the remote island, which lies along the strategic Bashi Channel, from a foreign invader. More than 11,000 troops from the United States and 5,000 from the Philippines, as well as 150 Australian and 100 French armed forces, are taking part in this year's edition of the Balikatan drills, which began on April 22nd and run until Friday. For the first time, some of this year's exercises are taking place beyond the 12 nautical mile boundary of the Philippines' territorial waters. 14 other nations sent observers, and there are some Chinese Navy ships that were close to some of the exercises in the South China Sea. So, this is something that's really important, I think, for us to pay attention to, is these escalations in the South China Sea near Taiwan and all this alliance building that the U.S. is doing. They say they got a new group now that they call the Squad, which is the U.S., the Philippines, Australia, and Japan. And, they're doing this all explicitly in the name of preparing for a future conflict with China. And when they do these drills, they say, these drills aren't aimed at any one country, but they're simulating fighting in the South China Sea, where the Philippines and China have this maritime dispute, and they're simulating fighting over Taiwan. I mean, what do you expect? How do you expect China to look at that? So anyway, that is it for the news for today. The first viewpoint I want to go over is a really great one from John Mearsheimer, and it is called "Biden's Foreign Policy Has the U.S. in Deep Trouble." And this is really a letter from John Mearsheimer telling people to donate to antiwar.com. And I just want to read the last few paragraphs because he says some very nice things about us. And it's very cool that, John Mearsheimer, who's one of the most kind of renowned foreign policy experts, especially when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, reads antiwar.com. So he says, antiwar.com is one of our most important alternative platforms on the planet. It is an ideal place to find first-rate analysis that challenges today's foreign policy orthodoxies. I visit antiwar.com every day and am invariably rewarded for doing so. Surely many of you who are reading this appeal also benefit in all sorts of ways from reading pieces published on this vital platform. All this means that we readers have a responsibility to help maintain a flourishing antiwar.com. In that spirit, I urge you to join me in making a generous contribution so that we can collectively increase the chances that the United States will begin acting in much smarter ways on the world stage. So please listen to John Mearsheimer and go to antiwar.com/donate. See the different ways you can support us. We appreciate everyone who's pitched in so far. This is how it is done. If you appreciate this show, it wouldn't happen without antiwar.com and without our readers who fund us. All right, so go check out our other viewpoints. One from James Carden and Katrina Vanden Heuvel. The Ukraine aid package heightens the risk of escalation. One from Branko Marchteach. Columbia student terrorists. NYPD must think we're pretty dumb. One from Ivan Eland. A missed off-ramp for U.S. Venezuela policy. One from Jeremy R. Hammond. How Israel supported Hamas against the PLO. So please go check all of that out. Our picture stories about these protests, I haven't really been covering them. There's been big protests in Israel. Thousands are rallying across Israel, calling for Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire deal. And I like this picture. It's a protester holding a sign that says, "No to Rafah, yes to a deal now." Go check out our blog and everything else. Lots of stuff lower down in the page too. So there's always a lot of stuff to read at antiwar.com, even if you listen to this show. So that is it for me for today. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on X. You could like, comment, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you prefer to watch. I will be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.